Today we'll be discussing Native American relations between Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay. Our timeline will look at multiple events between the years 1812 and 1850. First, we'll start with the Creek War. Occurring simultaneously with the War of 1812, the Creek War was between the Mississippi Creeks and the Tennessee militia. Both Clay and Jackson supported the war, and on March 27, 1814, Jackson himself led troops in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, which ended in a U.S. victory. Jackson's goal was to divide and conquer the natives, both friend and foe. Ultimately, the Treaty of Fort Jackson, signed on August 9, 1814, ended the war, resulting in Creeks and Seminoles giving up much of their land to American forces.
My name is Henry Clay. I'm the leader of the war hawks, and I pushed President Madison to accept the necessity of war, and accused British monarchy and France of arming Creeks and Seminoles of the Gulf Coast and Shawnees of the Ohio country to attack American frontier.
My first battle of the War of 1812 took me to Fort Mims, Alabama, to punish the Creek Indians who attacked the settlement, killing 250 Americans. Took advantage of the dissension between groups of natives. Divide and conquer was the best technique. In the end, I took the land for all the natives, even the ones who called me an ally, because the land was vital to protect our country against and is great for farming. I have no sympathy for land claims of any Native American, friend or foe.
This brings us to the First Seminole War. In December of 1817, President James Monroe ordered General Jackson to protect the state of Georgia from Native Americans and to capture runaway slaves. In May of 1818, Jackson followed a group of Seminoles and Creeks to Pensacola, Florida. There, Jackson killed 2 Seminoles and 2 British men residing in the Spanish territory. Jackson believed the natives were harboring runaway slaves and justified his actions as following orders.
After the War of 1812, I put my gun away and retired to my home. Unfortunately, though, President Monroe had a different idea. In 1817, he ordered me to take command of the troops in the Southwest again. My orders were to halt the Seminole attacks on Georgia and reclaim runaway slaves at all costs. This took me down to Florida. I had to capture Pensacola and St. Mark's because they were harboring runaways. We couldn't have that now.
Following the First Seminole War, Clay gave a speech to Congress on January 20, 1819, where he called for the censure of General Jackson. He claimed that Jackson's actions in the First Seminole War and the Treaty of Fort Jackson during the Creek War were not only an example of misconduct, but was an abuse of power and showed a dictatorial spirit. Despite Clay's speech being what other congressmen described as rhetorically appealing, Congress was ultimately unmoved and the censure unsuccessful. Even though Clay made strong accusations against the general, Jackson was elected governor of Florida on February 22, 1819, after the United States purchased the territory for a suspected $5 million.
I've seen so many deaths in the Creek War so far. As you know, I've become a peaceful person, and I insist on the supremacy of law. So I addressed to Congress. I've opened an investigation to censure Jackson for misconduct. Do you know what Jackson have done to Native Americans in the Treaty of Fort Jackson? Let me explain you. Jackson and his troops used the force of the bayonet, used army brutality. Jackson is a Hitler. Oh, wait a minute. Hitler wasn't born yet. Well, Jackson appears to be the dictator. As Americans, we have to spare Indians. After all of this, I'm tired of political life. I resigned to Congress and I'm going to return to practice law and build my plantation, of course, with the slave workforce.
Nearly a decade after Clay's censure for Jackson, the 5 civilized tribes began assimilating American culture into their own ways of life in 1827. The civilized tribes were made up of Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole Native Americans. Of them, the Cherokee showed the most advanced form of assimilation. The tribe married white women, wrote an alphabet for their spoken language, drafted a constitution modeled after the U.S. Constitution, and even owned slaves. The natives believed the U.S. would show them more respect and be more willing to negotiate if the natives could exemplify European American traditions in their own tribes. A few years after the 5 civilized tribes began cultural assimilation, Clay and Jackson ran against each other for presidency. As the U.S.'s seventh president, Jackson proposed his plan for the Indian removal in his first annual message to Congress on December 8, 1829. Jackson's policy called for the removal of all Native Americans. In exchange for the natives who moved west of the Mississippi, the U.S. government would offer protection and the opportunity for tribes to self-govern. Following his policy proposal, the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830. Though the act was initially seen as a voluntary removal for the Native Americans, it would soon become mandatory.
You know, those Native Americans, they've been doing a pretty good job down there. They've been assimilating and whatnot. And, they've been trying to, make laws similar. But unfortunately, I don't think it's enough. As my first and my only major act as president, I will be sending those 5 civilized tribes, the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Cherokee, out to this territory called Oklahoma. Out in Oklahoma, they'll be nice, they'll be happy, and, they'll be much happier over there. They have their own sovereign nation, and it's out of our way.
I used to be a member of Congress, and I resigned again, but I have friends in the Congress that will fight against the dictator and his Indian Removal Act. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I'm going to return to Washington. I'm going to take command of the anti-Jackson forces in Congress. I don't know what's in Jackson's mind. America is a republic, not a monarchy. I'm going to defeat Jackson for second-term president. Oh, what a shame. I lost the election again. But I condemn King Andrew, the born to command, of abuse of power and violation of the Constitution.
8 years went by following the Indian Removal Act until mass military action to remove natives occurred in 1838. Due to the high demand from American farmers for land occupied by the Native Americans, tribes were forcefully and violently removed and sent to the designated Indian Territory west of the Mississippi. Many Cherokees refused to leave and were subsequently forced out of Georgia to what is now known as the state of Oklahoma. Nearly 15,000 Cherokees marched 1,200 miles to reach their new home, and of them, approximately 1/4 of the population died en route. This march became known as the Trail of Tears.
Well, it's about time they get going, so they're going. Off to Oklahoma. A little bit of a trail there. Unfortunately, might be a little bit of tears. All I ever cared about was protecting the American people. That meant starting off fighting the Native Americans in 1813 and getting rid of them in 1838. I love the American people, and all I want is keep them safe.
I did everything for my country. I love my country and I love its constitution. I love liberty and safety and fear military despotism.